The late afternoon sun was sinking low in the sky over a quiet suburb in Seattle. Its fading glow bathed the rows of modest homes and the cracked sidewalks in soft golden light. At the end of one such street sat a small garage, its paint peeling and its roof sagging just slightly. But inside, it held the whole world of Ethan Cole. Ethan, 30 years old with grease permanently embedded under his fingernails, was finishing up his last repair of the day. His body was tired, his back aching from hours of bending under hoods, but his heart was as steady as ever. Life hadn't been easy for Ethan. His little garage had been his dream, but with rent overdue, bills piling up and fewer customers every week, it often felt like that dream was slipping away. He kept going, though, because fixing things wasn't just a job to him, it was who he was. He had grown up taking apart old radios, fixing broken lawnmowers, and patching up neighbors' cars. To him, broken things weren't failures, they were challenges. And maybe in some hidden way he fixed them, because he hoped he could one day fix the broken pieces of his own life, too. As he wiped the sweat from his brow and reached for his worn denim jacket, Ethan heard the sound of wheels scraping unevenly on the pavement. He turned his head and saw a little girl, maybe 8 years old, coming down the street. Her face was red and streaked with tears, and she was dragging along a bright pink bicycle with a chain dangling uselessly from its gears. The bike wobbled awkwardly as she pulled it, and she sniffled as though the weight of the broken chain was far heavier than it looked. Ethan felt his chest tighten. The girl stopped a few feet from him, her small hands trembling as she tried to lift the chain and set it back in place, but the greasy mess only smeared across her tiny fingers. She let out a soft whimper and sat down on the curb, clutching the handlebars. Ethan, though bone-tired from his day, walked over slowly. He crouched down to her level, resting one arm across his knee. His voice was gentle, like one might use to calm a frightened bird. "Don't worry, kiddo," he said, offering a smile. "I'll fix it in no time." The girl looked up at him with wide eyes. She had freckles scattered across her cheeks, and her pigtails were loose, strands of hair falling in her tear-streaked face. For a moment she hesitated, as though unsure if she could trust this stranger. But there was something steady, something kind in Ethan's eyes that seemed to melt her fear away. She sniffled and nodded, sliding the bike closer to him. Ethan rolled up his sleeves, pulled a rag from his pocket, and set to work. His fingers, though rough and calloused, moved with precision and care, as if he were handling something precious. The chain was tangled, rusted in places, and it had slipped from its gears. To any other passerby, it might have seemed like a lost cause, but to Ethan it was a simple puzzle waiting for the right touch. He dug into his old, battered toolbox, pulling out a screwdriver and a small wrench. The girl watched silently, her tears slowing as she studied his every move. To her, this was magic, a man who seemed to know exactly what to do, turning brokenness into wholeness right before her eyes. Minutes passed, and with each twist of his wrist, the bike began to look alive again. He tightened the bolts, cleaned the sprockets with an old rag, and carefully threaded the chain back onto the gears. His hands became blackened with grease, but his face remained calm, focused. Every so often he glanced up at the little girl, giving her a reassuring grin. Finally, he gave the pedal a spin, and the chain moved smoothly, clicking into place like it had never been broken at all. Ethan stood, brushing his hands against his jeans, leaving dark smudges on the fabric. "All right," he said with a hint of playful pride. "Give it a try." The little girl's eyes widened, and she quickly wiped her face with the back of her sleeve. Climbing onto the seat, she gripped the handlebars tightly, her legs shaking with anticipation. For a moment she hesitated, afraid the bike might betray her again. But then she pushed forward, her small legs pumping the pedals. To her surprise, the wheels spun smoothly, carrying her across the street with ease. A smile broke across her face, not just a small smile, but the kind of smile that lit up her whole being. She let out a laugh, a sound so pure it seemed to echo through the neighborhood. Ethan watched her, circle back toward him, the pink ribbons on her handlebars fluttering in the evening breeze. He felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't about fixing a bike, it was about giving a child back her joy. And in that moment, he felt richer than he ever had in his life. The girl stopped in front of him, panting with excitement, her cheeks flushed. "It's perfect," she exclaimed, her eyes shining like she had just been given the greatest gift in the world. Ethan chuckled softly and bent down again, tightening the bell on her handlebars. He gave it a gentle ring, and the cheerful sound made her giggle. He polished the metal with his rag until it gleamed, then handed the bike back to her with a little bow, as if returning a treasure to its rightful owner. The girl hopped off, surprising Ethan by wrapping her arms around him in a quick, tight hug. For a moment he froze. He wasn't used to affection, especially from strangers. But slowly he patted her back, his throat tightening unexpectedly. When she pulled away, she looked up at him with gratitude far too deep for her age. "Thank you," she whispered softly, her voice trembling with sincerity. Ethan forced a smile and waved her along, watching as she climbed back on the bike and pedaled down the street, her laughter trailing behind her. He stood there for a long while, hands in his pockets, staring after her. To anyone else, it might have seemed like nothing more than a small act of kindness, a mechanic fixing a bike for a little girl. But Ethan felt something stir deep inside him. He didn't know it yet, but that moment, that smile, that hug, was the spark that would ignite a change he never expected. The garage door creaked as he shut it for the night. The sky had grown darker, stars beginning to emerge, and the streets had quieted. Yet the echo of the little girl's laughter lingered in Ethan's ears, brighter than any song. He walked home along the cracked sidewalk, his steps lighter than usual. Somewhere deep down, though he couldn't explain why, he felt as though his life had just shifted, that fate had placed him on a path he couldn't yet see. What he didn't know was that the girl's family and her powerful mother had already noticed what he had done, and his life, once ordinary and overlooked, was about to be changed forever. The sound of tires crunching against gravel broke the quiet evening. A sleek black SUV rolled to a stop near the curb, its glossy paint catching the last traces of daylight. The back door swung open, and out stepped a woman, whose presence immediately shifted the air around her. Victoria Hayes, only 38, carried herself with the authority of someone who had built an empire from the ground up. In corporate world, she was known as Seattle's tech queen, a visionary who had turned a startup into a billion-dollar company. But at that moment, she wasn't a CEO. She was a mother whose heart had nearly broken when her daughter wandered off. Victoria's eyes darted across the street, panic flashing for only a split second before relief washed over her. There she was, her little girl, riding her pink bike in perfect circles, laughter spilling into the air like music. Victoria's chest rose and fell as she steadied herself. She had imagined the worst, and now, seeing her daughter safe, she felt her knees weaken with gratitude. But then her gaze shifted, and she noticed the man standing nearby. His jeans were stained with oil, his shirt smudged with grease, and his hands bore the marks of hard, honest work. Yet there was something about him that drew her in. The girl braked suddenly and rushed toward her mother, flinging her arms around Victoria's waist. "Mom, look, my bike works again," she squealed, tugging her by the hand to show her. Victoria bent low, smoothing her daughter's hair, still catching her breath. "Sweetheart, I was so worried," she whispered, kissing her forehead. But as her daughter proudly pointed toward the mechanic, Victoria straightened and studied him with narrowed eyes. "You fixed this?" she asked, her voice calm but laced with curiosity. The man shrugged, his demeanor humble, almost embarrassed. "It was just a bike, ma'am. Kids deserve to smile." Those words stopped Victoria. In her world, everything came with a price tag. Every service, every favor, every handshake, it all carried expectation. Yet here stood a man who had asked for nothing. No recognition, no payment, not even a name. Just a simple act of kindness, given freely. For a moment, Victoria couldn't speak. She was used to boardrooms, shareholders, contracts, people circling her like vultures for a piece of her fortune. And here was someone who had nothing yet gave more than all of them combined. She felt an unfamiliar sting in her chest, a tug she hadn't experienced in years. Ethan shifted awkwardly under her gaze. He wasn't the type to stand before powerful women in designer suits, women who lived in a world far above his own. His instinct was to nod politely and walk away, to disappear back into his small life. But Victoria's eyes, sharp yet softened by maternal relief, held him still. He cleared his throat, wiping his hands on the rag in his pocket, leaving darker stains on fabric, already ruined. "I'm glad she's okay," he added quietly, gesturing toward the little girl who was spinning her wheels proudly as though she had a brand new toy. Victoria's daughter beamed, her voice bubbling with joy. "He fixed it so fast, Mom, and he made it shine too." She rang the polished bell, the clear sound cutting through the tension in the air. Ethan smiled faintly, rubbing the back of his neck. For him, it was nothing, a simple repair, the kind he had done 1,000 times before. But for this little girl, it was everything. For Victoria, it was something more, a glimpse into a world she had long forgotten. A world where people helped simply because it was right, not because it was profitable. Victoria crossed her arms, her gaze steady. "Do you know who I am?" she asked suddenly, her tone sharp but not unkind. Ethan hesitated, shaking his head. "Doesn't matter," he replied, his voice even. "You're her mom. That's enough." The words struck her harder than she expected. For so long, she had been Victoria Hayes, the CEO, the figurehead, the powerhouse. Rarely had anyone looked past that to see her as just a mother. She blinked, taken aback by the simplicity of his answer. For the first time in years, she felt seen in a way that had nothing to do with her wealth or reputation. The driver of the SUV, a tall man in a suit, stepped forward as though to intervene, but Victoria raised a hand, stopping him. She didn't want this moment disrupted. Instead, she studied Ethan more closely. He looked tired, worn from work, but there was a steadiness about him, a quiet resilience that money couldn't buy. "Why did you help her?" she pressed, her voice softer this time. Ethan met her gaze. Unflinching, "Because she needed it," he said simply, "and because no kid should cry over something I can fix." Her heart tightened. She couldn't remember the last time she'd heard such honesty, stripped of all polish and agenda. Her world was filled with deals and negotiations, with people who always wanted something from her. But this man wanted nothing. He had given her daughter back her smile, and he seemed ready to walk away without a trace. That unsettled her and intrigued her. She glanced down at her daughter, who was now circling happily again, her laughter echoing like wind chimes through the neighborhood, then back at Ethan, who stood with his rags still in hand, ready to fade back into obscurity. Victoria stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You don't even know her name," she said, as if testing him. Ethan shook his head. "I don't need to. She's a kid. That's enough." The words lingered between them, heavier than she expected. For years, Victoria had lived surrounded by people who needed to know everything, the names, the titles, the net worth. Yet here was a man who asked for nothing, not even recognition. Something about it broke through the armor she wore every day. She felt suddenly vulnerable, almost as though this stranger had reminded her of something she had lost along the way. Her daughter came skidding to a stop once more, hopping off the bike with excitement. "Mom, he's like a hero. Can we keep him?" she asked innocently, tugging at Victoria's sleeve. Ethan let out a startled laugh, scratching the back of his neck. Again, embarrassed, Victoria's lips curved into the faintest smile, the kind that softened her sharp features. "Heroes don't always wear capes," she said quietly, still studying Ethan. For the first time in a long while, she felt her guarded world crack open just a little, and in that small fracture, hope seeped through. As the evening deepened and the streetlights flickered on, Victoria realized something she hadn't felt in years: gratitude, pure and uncalculated. She had built her life on control, on strategy, on power. But in this quiet suburb, in front of a crumbling garage, a stranger had shown her the simplest form of humanity, and it shook her to her core. She didn't know it yet, but this mechanic's kindness would ripple far beyond a broken bike. It would intertwine with her life, her daughter's, and perhaps even her heart, in ways she could never have predicted. The morning sun spilled golden light over the quiet neighborhood as Ethan opened the doors to his tiny garage. He expected another day of oil-stained hands, meager pay, and the slow grind of survival. But before he could even put on his gloves, a sleek black SUV pulled up once again. His heart skipped when he saw Victoria step out, her sharp heels clicking against the pavement, her aura of power as commanding as the day before. He wiped his hands nervously on a rag, wondering why she had come back. Customers rarely returned after a job well done. Victoria approached with a calm confidence, her eyes softer than yesterday. "Ethan," she began, her voice steady, "I thought about what happened yesterday. Men like you deserve more than this little garage. You deserve opportunity." Ethan frowned slightly, unsure if he had heard correctly. He had spent years fighting to keep this shop alive, barely making enough to cover rent. His pride was wrapped in these walls, yet his struggle was evident in every crack of paint and broken tool. "I don't understand," he said slowly. Victoria gave him a small, almost vulnerable smile. "I want you to work for me." The words landed like thunder in his ears. Work for her? She wasn't just anyone. This was Victoria Hayes, Seattle's tech mogul, a name that appeared on magazine covers and business headlines. I fix cars, bikes, that's all," Ethan stammered, taken aback. Victoria shook her head. "No, Ethan, you fix more than that. Yesterday you fixed something priceless, my daughter's smile. That kind of heart is what I need in my company. I want you to lead our repair division, fair pay, full benefits, a real future." Ethan's jaw dropped, and for the first time in years, he was speechless. His first instinct was to refuse. He wasn't polished, wasn't corporate. He didn't belong in skyscrapers with glass windows and designer suits. He belonged in grease and wrenches. But as he looked into Victoria's eyes, he saw something genuine, not pity, not charity, but belief. She truly saw value in him. He swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly. "Are you sure about this?" he asked cautiously. Victoria nodded with unwavering certainty. "Ethan, people like you are rare. You gave without expecting anything in return. That's exactly the kind of leadership this city needs, and my daughter already trusts you." Later that afternoon, Ethan sat at his workbench, staring blankly at the old tools that had carried him through years of hardship. The idea of leaving this life behind both terrified and excited him. He thought about rent notices, about nights when he skipped meals to pay bills, about every rejection letter he'd ever received when trying to apply for jobs outside his small shop. And then he thought about that little girl's smile, the way she had called him a hero. Maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to be more. His chest tightened, but for the first time it wasn't from despair. It was hope. Within a week, Ethan found himself standing in the lobby of Hayes Innovations, a towering glass building in the heart of Seattle. His boots clicked awkwardly on the marble floor as employees in sleek suits hurried past him. He felt out of place, like a fish dropped into an ocean far too vast. But then he saw her Victoria, striding across the lobby with a reassuring smile. "Welcome aboard," she said warmly. "Don't worry about fitting in, just be who you are. That's why I brought you here." Ethan nodded, his nerves still buzzing, but her confidence gave him strength. The first days were overwhelming. He was introduced to a team of engineers and technicians, all of whom eyed him with curiosity. He wasn't one of them, not on paper, not by training. Yet when a piece of machinery malfunctioned during a test, Ethan rolled up his sleeves, crouched down, and fixed it with nothing more than intuition and skill. His colleagues stared in awe, their advanced degrees momentarily humbled by the raw talent of a mechanic who had spent his life solving problems with his hands. Slowly, respect replaced doubt, and Ethan began to find his place. Victoria often checked in on him, sometimes with her daughter in tow. The little girl would run through the halls, her laughter breaking the corporate stiffness that hung in the air. She always stopped by Ethan's desk, bringing him cookies she had baked with her mom. "You're my hero," she reminded him often, her innocent eyes filled with admiration. Each time, Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. He had fixed a bike, nothing more, yet somehow that act had tethered him to a family he never thought he'd have. In their presence, his loneliness slowly faded. Weeks turned into months, and Ethan became more than just an employee. He brought humanity into a company that had long been driven by numbers and deadlines. His co-workers began to admire not only his technical brilliance, but also his sincerity. He listened, he helped, he lifted others without asking for anything in return. Soon, whispers spread through the city, stories about the mechanic who fixed a little girl's bike and was handpicked by the CEO herself. It sounded like a fairy tale, but it was real, and it was changing Ethan's life in ways he could barely grasp. For Victoria, Ethan became more than a hire. He became a trusted friend, someone she could confide in when the weight of leadership grew too heavy. Late evenings in her office often turned into quiet conversations about life, struggle, and the values they both held dear. She admired his humility, his resilience, his refusal to let hardship harden his heart. And for her, daughter Ethan was no longer just the man who fixed her bike. He was a role model, someone who proved that kindness could build more than wealth, it could build family. Ethan never stopped working with his hands. Even in the sleek labs of Hayes Innovations, he kept a corner of the workshop cluttered with tools, bolts, and half-finished projects. It reminded him of where he came from, grounding him in the truth that success didn't erase struggle. It grew from it. Sometimes he still rode past his old garage, the faded sign swinging in the wind. But instead of sadness, he felt pride. That place had been his crucible, and without it, he wouldn't have been ready for the life he was building now. By the end of the year, Ethan wasn't just leading a division. He had become a symbol within the company, a living reminder that talent and heart mattered more than titles or pedigree. He was invited to speak at community events, to mentor young mechanics, to inspire those who felt overlooked by society. Every time he stood before a crowd, he remembered the little girl with the broken bike and how her smile had sparked this journey. His voice never carried arrogance, only gratitude, and in return he received something more valuable than success: respect. Seattle buzzed with the story. Newspapers ran headlines about the mechanic who became a corporate leader. Social media lit up with admiration, sharing clips of his speeches, praising his authenticity in a world that often felt fake. But beyond the fame and the recognition, what mattered most to Ethan was simpler. It was the evenings he spent having dinner with Victoria and her daughter, laughter echoing through a home that had once felt cold and empty. It was the moments of warmth, of family, of belonging, things he had once believed were forever out of reach. Looking back, Ethan often wondered how everything had changed so quickly. One broken bike, one act of kindness, one chance encounter, and his world had transformed completely. He realized that life didn't always turn on grand decisions or calculated plans. Sometimes it turned on a smile, a small gesture, a choice to care, when it would have been easier to walk away. That day, in the quiet suburb of Seattle, he had chosen kindness, and in return the universe had given him more than he ever dreamed of. Not just success, but love, respect, and a new family to call his own.